How would you feel to win a staring contest with your anxiety? How would it feel to be able to stare it down and have it cower before you? Welcome, everyone. This is week 15 in a series promoting my book, I Cubed: Unlock the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions. Now available for pre-sale on Amazon. Just search for my name, Dr. Rick Stewart. When potential clients contact me, the number one complaint by far is that they're struggling with anxiety. This is the first example from the second tenet of emotional management, where we must make sure that we have the right brand or type of emotion. The label we ascribe to the emotion has a huge impact on how we strategize, which path we take to alleviate that particular negative emotion, thus fulfilling our emotional goal. Many say that anxiety is the cause of their greatly decreased quality of life. When I explain the concept of needing to label the emotion correctly, I lightly tease by saying I kind of feel sorry for anxiety because it seems like anxiety is constantly getting thrown under the bus, if you will, and blamed for everything. Are we really talking about anxiety? Is that really the main emotion we're experiencing? So, to illustrate my point, I met with a client for our first session who said he was struggling with anxiety. He told me it was because he was moving from Virginia to Austin, Texas. Prior to meeting with clients for the first time, I asked them to watch a video that I created that describes my theoretical approach, which is the content of this book, basically. And along with the video, I created a PowerPoint presentation that they can download and review to better learn the process. So I wrote my own definition for each of the emotions, and I define anxiety as the emotion we experience when we're trying to control what we can't control. In my definitions, I don't just describe the traits of the emotions we're experiencing, but also the action of the response we use, or the path to address the emotion itself. So, anxiety is often produced by a topic over which we don't have any control. So, instead of just being okay with the fact that we can't do anything about it, we fret and think of ways that we can control it. After my client explained the cause of his anxiety, I asked him, what are you trying to control that you can't control when it comes to this move from Virginia to Texas? As he explained it, it really had everything to do with everything he had to do himself in the move. So I suggested to him that it wasn't really anxiety that he was dealing with, it was stress, because it was everything that was in the control column. I encouraged him to be as detailed as possible in mapping out a daily schedule, detailing what he needs to do every day leading up to the move, and then write a detailed schedule of what time he'll leave, when he'll eat, what time he'll stop, where he'll stay, etc. If he still has energy, go over every detail of his plan again and add more details. If there are no more details to add, then tell his mental model, his frontal lobe tells his mental model that every detail is set, that he has control over, and the leftover energy is there simply to execute the plan and start driving. We must understand that our mental model is doing its job. It's simply a machine that's reminding us that something is unsettled, and that's the key. It's doing its job. It might be unsettled, or it's undone, or it's not where we want it to be. This means the emotional energy that's produced in every area of our lives where there is a paradox. The paradox is simply the gap between what the difference is between what we believe should be and what it is right now in any particular area. I define the emotional energies of anxiety and stress differently. While the feelings of each are strikingly similar, they are separate because they are based in two very different locations. While anxiety is produced from what we don't have control over, stress is produced, again, from what we do have control over. In other words, stress is in the control column, while anxiety is in the no control column. To determine what emotional label is more accurate, we need to determine, the topic that's actually producing the emotion. To begin with, is in the emotional column or in the no control column? So which column is in? Control or no control? The reason this is so crucial is because our mental models produce a very different suggestion to our frontal lobes between anxiety and stress. If we declare we have anxiety, our mental model responds, okay, everyone, it's anxiety. Fire up the fight, flight, or freeze machines. Even with these responses, we still attempt to control what we can't control by trying to influence that topic or those people who are in that no control column. If we say we're stressed, our mental models try and figure out how to accomplish everything on our task list. It's a very, very different response, all depending upon what we label it. If we stall and don't start immediately, and the stress just sits there, we're burning energy, basically completing the task or strategizing how we're going to accomplish the list or task. It starts becoming overwhelming and absolutely takes on the emotional experience of anxiety because it's just sitting there. Even if we correctly label everything as being in the control column, also the list could be so large that by definition, we don't have all the resources, whether it be time, money, or energy to do it all, which means we don't ultimately have control over it, completing all of it. The only option in this case is to decrease the number of items through various means, such as delegating them or postponing them. For example, stress in and itself is not bad. This would be the one negative emotion that, if you notice, is not on the list of negative emotions because not only is it not bad, but ironically, it is good. With stress, the only evaluation is the amount of stress. We all know that stress can be too high, of course, right? So either the number of items in the control column is way too much for us to complete, or we believe that the lie that incompletion of the tasks, if we don't get them completed, would result in a catastrophe, which means we have failed and our value and worth are impacted by it. But they're lies. We know that we have the right amount of stress when we burn that energy that's in that control column by accomplishing the task and arrive at a sense of accomplishment to produce a good emotion. The segment of the control column that wouldn't necessarily end up in a state of complete rest is when the tasks themselves in the control column are part of a larger topic that has a portion of it in our control column and a portion of it out of our control. This happens like in relationships. So showing love, for example, but not having control over receiving love, or in a conflict resolution and problem solving, in looking for a job, we only have control over influencing others applying for jobs, so on and so forth. We can influence those who interview us and hire us, but we can't control getting the interview or getting the job itself. Or in voting, of course, we can vote, but we don't have control over the outcome. We can only burn energy influencing, but we don't have ultimate control over the outcome. Obviously, anxiety is a completely different animal. It is squarely created from the no control column, which is infinitely larger than the control column because what we don't have control over, obviously, compared to what we do have control over, is a ratio that's too enormous to even spend the energy comparing. When addressing this topic, I'm going to go from the macro to micro. The most macro being the things that only God has control over. But under that are things that he allowed us to have free will as human beings, and then created a law, which is the law of free will, that he committed to not transgressing. And this is important, which means that people have a free will and have the power to choose to do both good and evil. And God will not override their free will, or else it would not be free will. Our level of anxiety is a direct result of two things related to this entire column: threat and trust. So, threat and trust. What topics in your life are producing anxiety in you? The reason you have anxiety is because of a perceived threat from that topic. And you don't have trust in the very agents, other people, and or maybe God, that do have control over these topics. The probability that these agents will act in such a way that is not in your best interest is high, which means low trust. And the consequences of those actions will harm you in some way, which is the threat. As described in the last chapter, most of humanity believes in God. So that's why a lot of this book is just based in that premise. And their image of who God is and what he thinks of us is a huge factor in our emotional experiences. If the image of God you created in your mind from whatever religion you're a part of results in either an ever-present threat, let's say of judgment, for example, or creates a low level of trust, he isn't good or doesn't notice me, that would logically create anxiety. The clearest passage in the Bible on this and anxiety is Philippians 4:4-8, which states, "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be made known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, in prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And then the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." Finally, brethren, verse 8, "Whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, if there is any virtue or any other thing that's praiseworthy, meditate on these things." From this passage, allow me to point out the key points without exhaustively explaining each part. So first, rejoicing is a command where we choose to have joy, which is more synonymous with peace than happiness. And that's a key piece when we hear the word joy or rejoicing. We are to control our emotions, not project negative emotions, nor allow them to overflow onto others, because the Lord is near, which means he cares and is good and is actively engaged in helping us in the current situation. Because he is good, anxiety is outlawed. Concern is appropriate. Anxiety is illegal. The exact same Greek word used for both concern and anxiety are the same, but it really has to do again with the right amount of emotional energy produced, which is concern, which incorporates trusting God and as always being good, and the other anxiety, which is a result of the lack of trust. This is ultimately from you believing God is not good and he's to blame, or you believe that he's not interested or not involved. Notice that key difference. This is a false image of who he is, accusing him of things that he did not do and saying he is lying because he won't do what he said he would do. To make sure you don't fall into this, pray and talk to God and be thankful. Why? Because as you look back, God has always been good and has proven that to everyone. When this current topic is over and you look back, you will thank him for being good once again. Pray and ask him for what you want, but thank him for proving his goodness to you and never failing you. If you do this, peace will overpower your negative emotions without you knowing what's going on behind the scenes. That's our understanding. Finally, it is crucial that you figure out what God's opinion is on any topic. What does he think about it? Whatever the topic is, list everything that's true about it, and then how to think and respond in a noble, just, pure, lovely, excellent, and worshipful way. Once you list those sentences, reread them over and over as you walk through the process until the topic is completed. Anxiety is all about, again, threat and degree of trust. What I just described in Philippians is related to our overall lives and God's engagement with us. Then there are topics related to having other free will prayers involved in having a large say in the outcome that will directly impact you. With those individuals and situations, you may be absolutely right that there is a real threat and absolutely justified in not trusting, right? So trust is subjective, but we determine how much we trust based upon the truth. Nevertheless, you need to burn all of your emotional energy in the control column through strategy development, controlling what you can control, and trying to influence what you can influence. Countless books obviously can be written on this, but I've already given several techniques in this book in previous chapters that can greatly reduce the threat. What if the threat is small? Many clients tell me that they experience anxiety that is ever present, and they can't figure out what it is that is causing the anxiety. Many clients might know what they are anxious about and know that the threat is small, but still results in a full-blown panic attack. I believe the former is from bad past experiences that have convinced their mental models to assume that a threat is always waiting around the corner and that at any moment they're going to have their world rocked again in some way. The latter is a result of the same, but the events were probably of a larger magnitude and have created a short in the fuse of their fight, flight, or freeze mechanism that makes this intense response, which is the panic attack, immediate and frequent. The other common option is that their experiences that are causing the anxiety are very normal, standard, and common. But because of the causes that create inflation, as we talked about, the inflation of the emotion, namely lies, taking things personally, which is related to identity, value, and worth, or the carryover effect from traumatic experiences, or a person simply having low resiliency or low tolerance to stress, or just being weak minded, honestly, creates anxiety and a panic that greatly exaggerates the emotion to the threat, even though in reality, the threat is truly minimal. If the anxiety is ever present, or there is a repeated occurrence of panic attacks, I call that an overstimulated amygdala. The amygdala is a part of our brain in charge of these emotions. When the amygdala is overstimulated from previous experiences or what have you, I believe it's way too sensitive to stimuli and needs to be corrected. This can certainly happen through therapy, but absolutely, I encourage the client to speak to a psychiatrist to see if medication can help. I'm okay with that, of course. I have no problem with medication because I believe that medication can help stabilize the amygdala to allow therapy to be more effective. I do not believe that anxiety is a permanent state that will result in medication being required for the rest of our lives, certainly. I'm not a medical doctor, and I'm sure there are biological situations where heightened anxiety is a direct result of another biological issue. But those cases are infrequent outliers. No matter what, allow your doctor to be your guide on that issue. I do know that every doctor I've ever worked with would adamantly recommend therapy in combination with the medication. If the goal is to have the right type of emotion and the right amount, then you know if the response to the situation you are in truly does require a response of fighting or running for your life or just freezing. Then you're definitely not thinking about examining the negative emotions at that point. Our brains are an incredible creation. When you experience negative emotions, step back and know that the negative energy produced by our brains was designed by God to be burned off completely. When our ancestors felt fear or anxiety because, let's say, of the saber-toothed tiger approaching their cave, they would more than likely need that energy to run or fight. If you don't know how to burn the energy completely or where to burn it, then you need to figure out what is being exposed in you first before you do anything. So anxiety is the negative emotion that can be the most present, but the source of it may be hidden. Experiencing ongoing anxiety is bad enough, but it is even more unsettling when a client can't figure out why it's there. Nevertheless, if all biological sourcing has been ruled out, then the fact is that you've trained your amygdala to be overstimulated because of your just interpretation of situations. That is your free will choice on how to interpret situations. The brain was created to respond to intense threats through fight, flight, or freeze response. Knowing this to be true, you need to what? Prove the threat to validate the brain's response. So when you're having anxiety, keep asking yourself, what is the threat right now? It may take time to figure it out, especially if it's not, micro present, it's obvious. It may be an overall macro threat, such as a threat to your future quality of life via loss of a job, loss of income, loss of relationships, the state of our world, of course, or the state of our country. As I write this, President Biden just dropped out of the presidential race yesterday. When you're reading this, how did everything turn out? Which it remains to be seen, right? All these things create in us anxiety because there are so many threats out there. However, if it is a macro threat, then you need to return to Philippians 4:4-8 to address it. If you are a Christian, if you're not, then what are your beliefs about your God? And what does that God say about your future and the future of our world? Who is going to solve this whole thing? If you're an atheist, then please don't tell me you trust in the goodness of humanity to solve this thing. I honestly feel sorry for atheists. The only coping skill is to block out of your mind and just hope something changes. I'm not a doomsday person, but I also would say if you aren't legitimately concerned about the state of our world, then you are in proactive denial and ignorance. Now, as Christians, we have an answer to all this, which is God creating a new heavens and a new earth. Humanity just progressively gets worse because it simply does not want to submit to God or believes that the great lie that God isn't good, the greatest lie ever, so he can't be trusted. That has been the lie since the beginning, Genesis chapter 3. That's the answer. But for many of you, the story you tell yourself is enough for you to avoid this altogether and lock it away somewhere in your mind. Please don't. Now, notice what you're feeling right now. Whatever your mental model suggested to you as you read and as we talked about the above, either decreased or increased your negative emotions. Your frontal lobe must decide on whether to validate your recent mental model or you are going to burn energy responding to it by wondering if you are blind to something. You will either continue to write a story that somehow dismisses what I'm talking about, or you will choose to cry out for insight and understanding and search for it as hidden gold and silver. Yes, I'm trying to influence your beliefs, absolutely, but I'm also trying to show you that the anxiety you are feeling is trying to tell you something. You need to ask yourself, ask your soul, what and where is the threat? Again, you may find you are completely at peace and you have just trained your amygdala to be overstimulated, but you need to do the work to conclude that. We all know that our culture promotes taking anxiety medication long term or numbing behaviors in a variety of different ways to distract us from doing the inner work. Are you going to turn around and walk through that door of negative emotions, or are you going to stand outside of the house of your heart and continue to yell out to anyone who will listen and endlessly talk and lament about what is out of your control? There is an effective answer to responding to what is out of your control, but it is unattainable or unsustainable if you don't first do the hard work of addressing all the rooms in your house, the house of your heart, that are creating these emotions. Talk to you soon.